Thanks in no small part to a marketing team that's among the absolute best in the business, this car needs no introduction. It's the Tata Curvv, and it's kind of a big deal for three important reasons. Number one, it marks Tata's entry into the 4.2, 4.3 meter SUV space that has the Creta, Seltos, Grand Vitara Hyryder, Kushaq Tygoon, MG Aster, and probably 9 bajillion other options by the time this video goes live. The second thing is they're entering it with this coupe SUV body style, a design philosophy that was as controversial in the early 2000s when we first got familiar with it as it is today, if you go by the chatter online that we've seen about this car. And lastly, they're entering it with an electric powertrain first, signaling Tata's intent for the future and that EVs are going to be a major, if not only part of Tata Motors' future. This car definitely knows how to make a lot of great headlines, but it's time to get into the body text of the report and see if this is a story worth buying into, quite literally. Beginning with, what is this car's biggest claim to fame? The way it looks. Let's start off the design with the lighting systems and what they do when you approach or get into the car, starting off with what the car does when you hit unlock. Pretty little animation like we had seen with the Nexon and other modern age Tata cars. Then we start her up. Makes a little bit of a grumbling sound at the start. Sounds futuristic but a little comical at the same time. Then we have the pilot light. Just dims down a little bit. Then the headlight. Then we move to high beam. It also has fog lamps with the cornering function. So when you turn the wheels, you get that little bit of assistance as well, and it happens even when you're static. And of course, you have sequential turn indicators. And when you do decide to charge the car up, you have to first switch her off. And then the available option pops up of electrically releasing the charger flap. And while in the Punch EV, that was a function that you could do only to pop it open, here you can electrically shut it as well. Just that little bit additional of a premium touch. Now up front, this is a handsome if familiar looking car. Familiar because it's not going to take anyone much time to make the connection to the Tata Nexon. In fact, when they were unveiling the Tata Curvv live on the stream, Arun, whose niece is about 2 years old, looked at the car's unveil and immediately said, "Bappa ya Nexon car asa," because he has a long-term Tata Nexon and she knows what that car looks like, and immediately made the connection to the Curvv itself. It's not a bad thing, of course, because family looks are anything but unfamiliar to us at this point. It is objectively a very good looking front end, let's face it. It is a handsome, beautiful car, definitely very good on the eyes. It's just that when it's going to be in your IRVM, you may not be able to tell it apart from a Nexon that's following you all that easily. Over to the side profile, and I need a little time to put my thoughts together because even I'm wrapping my head around this whole coupe SUV body style being offered in this particular size or budget space. Because think about every single coupe SUV that you know. The GLE, the BMW X6, of course, the X4, the Porsche Cayenne Coupe. All of them have one thing that's playing to their favor, and that is their size, both in terms of height and length, which allows them to have a more organic swoop. So if you were able to give this car a little bit more length, I'm talking just about 150 to 200 millimeters, putting it in a similar size space as something like a Renault Arcana, just imagine how much more effective the coupe SUV design would have translated. But given the dimensions that they're playing with, the execution over here is quite on point. Like, maybe it's going to take you a little bit more time to get used to it, and trust me, this thing does look a lot better in person than it does in photographs. But once you start seeing enough of them on the road, you are going to start appreciating this design a whole lot more. And there is no doubt about it, this is a design that is going to stand out quite easily. So if that's what you're looking for, look no further. And of course, this design is helped in no small part by these 18-inch alloy wheels. I am not a fan of these EV looking flaps on the alloy wheels, to be honest, and these flush fitting door handles, which definitely complement the car's look, but honestly in practicality, using them, it's sort of becoming like a two-step process, which I'm not the biggest fan of. And over to the rear, you see the angle where everybody has been calling this the Desi Urus, helped in no small part by the sharply raked rear windscreen. the roof spoiler, and of course the connected LED tail lights. It's a very distinctive angle of the Tata Curvv, and it's one that looks especially good when it's like maybe 3 to 4 car lengths ahead. I'm not sure how to explain this, you'll understand once you see it in the real world. But yes, again, in this angle also, if the car just had a little bit more length to play with, think about how much more beautiful that coupe SUV design language would have translated, which makes me think about what if we just had a Tata Harrier offered as a coupe. When you have that bigger SUV size to play with, that car design could look simply incredible. And frankly, that's kind of what we saw with the Tata H5X concept in the first place, didn't we? Some food for thought. And since we are at the rear, let's get into the boot space. And this is something that you can operate the power tailgate using the gesture function. You can also operate it from the key itself. And you have about 500 liters of boot space to play with, plenty to put in 1 or 2 full-size suitcases. You also have the option of folding the rear seat down 60-40 split, and it comes out to some absurd number in terms of liters. But yeah, the coupe SUV body style has not resulted in any kind of compromise when it comes to boot space. But there's more on that and how it translates into the cabin space once we hop inside. Over to the back seat, and I'm standing outside the car, which is an indication of what is a drawback with the Tata Curvv. Now, Kamesh here is 5'8". He is the man who brings you a lot of the beautiful imagery that you're going to see in many of our videos. He is 5'8" with the driver's seat set to his driving position. Here's a quick shot of him doing that, in case you don't believe me. And he has about, let's say what, a fist's worth of knee room? More than that. Little bit more, fist and a half, let's say, to the knee room to the driver's seat ahead. And his headroom is also about roughly the same. So somebody of his height is going to be comfortable. There is adequate space here. But again, when we're talking about a 4.3 meter SUV, a compact and not a subcompact SUV, this is not particularly impressive, and things get a little bit aggravated on this front when you jump to somebody who's just a little bit taller at 6 feet. And now we move to someone who is taller. Amay, who's exactly 6 feet tall, has set the driving position as per his preference, and we'll show you that shot right now because a lot of people on the internet tend not to believe me when I say that. So anyway, now that you've seen that, this is the kind of space he has available, and as you can see, it's not especially impressive. A 6-footer behind a 6-footer is just about able to manage. He has about half a fist worth of knee room, I'd say, just about. And the headroom, well, if he scooches all the way back, there's not much to spare. So just about to manage is not something that we're expecting when you talk about a compact SUV. It's something you can maybe make do with when you're talking about the sub 4 meter space, but not over here. And that's because even though the wheelbase of the Curvv is somewhere around 60 to 62 millimeters longer than that of a Nexon, it hasn't really translated to that much of an increment when it comes to actual cabin space, although the boot space has gone up, and that is a benefit with this larger car size. And because this is the Curvv EV, the battery pack does take up a little bit more room into the floor space itself. So you land up sitting a little bit knees up if you're on the taller side. And mind you, this is going to be even if you get the 45 or 55 kilowatt hour battery pack, this facet of the Curvv's seating position does not change. And in addition to that, the car just doesn't have the greatest sense of width. It isn't feeling like an upgrade compared to the Nexon in that sense. And that is something that is going to be a little lacking in this car, which is kind of important when you're moving up from a sub 4 meter to a 4.3 meter SUV. And importantly, if you're slightly older or taller, the aperture combined with the floor height makes ingress and egress a little bit tricky. And because I know the internet would not forgive me if I did not give you this shot, here is what the headroom is like for someone who is 6'5" and with the seat pushed almost all the way ahead. So yeah, it's not going to be a great place to be in if you're exceptionally tall, and it's also something that you need to account for when you're checking out this car in the showroom, say if you wear a turban. In the front row of the Curvv, there are a couple of things that are derivative from the Nexon, for better or for worse. Let me tackle the not so good bits first. So if you are on the taller side, of course I am the exception, but even if you're somewhere around 6 feet tall, the default driving position for you is going to be taking the seat further back. And that's fine, but this does not have a reach adjustment for the steering, only tilt. So if you are on the taller side, you can land up sitting in a driving position where you're trying to sort of stretch for the steering, and it does make it a little bit awkward. And if you are as tall as I am, you also have to adjust the backrest because the roof sort of scrapes my head over here. So yeah, it does become a little bit awkward if you're on the taller side. And additionally, like we saw at the rear seat, because the cabin width isn't all that different compared to the Nexon, you aren't getting that big car feeling even when you're seated over here. You do have the SUV feeling because you're sitting high up and you do have the commanding view of the bonnet itself. But because the width is missing, that step up in terms of experience hasn't quite happened. Then there's the design. Now this is something that I can't complain about because I do like the Nexon's dashboard design quite a bit. You do have premium bits like this, the trim piece that sort of mimics the air dam finish that we have on the outside. You also have this leatherette padding with stitching over here, and it does look quite nice, but bear in mind these light white interiors don't age all that well. They're quite easy to stain and get a little bit dirty, so upkeep can be a little bit of a challenge. But the plastics besides here, not the biggest fan. It's a little bit scratchy, and they don't tend to age all that well. So this was an opportunity for Tata to step things up with the Curvv, which hasn't quite happened, not just over here but also on the door pad itself. Even though you do have this leatherette padding, the fitment over here could have been better. We've seen some misaligned bits, some loose bits, and that is not something you want to see when you're stepping up into a higher segment compared to the Nexon, not even in the Nexon segment by itself. But one thing that I'm so glad about is that the Nexon's tech package has made it into the Curvv, because I am a big fan of it. It has already been punching above its segment, and now it's sort of sitting in the appropriate segment if you think about it. So here we have the 12.3-inch touchscreen infotainment system. As we know, it does come with both wireless Android Auto as well as Apple CarPlay. It has the Wi-Fi hotspot function, so you can watch apps like Disney Hotstar or YouTube on this directly. And it's paired to an absolutely epic 9-speaker JBL sound system. You will absolutely love that. And complementing that is an ambient lighting system. It corresponds to your drive modes, and you also have the sound mood lighting system. So whenever you're playing some music, you can see the lights that are placed inside the door pad sort of pulsating along with that, something similar to what we had seen in cars like the Kia Seltos and the Sonet as well. Along with that, you have this 10.25-inch digital instrument cluster. The execution is again fantastic, a long range of data, but still somehow they've managed to balance the UX just right, so you get all the information quite easily accessible. It also has multi-views. You can have it in a single dial or dual dial view. You can have the navigation feed displayed over here as well. And simultaneously, one improvement that we've seen is, besides offering an absolutely fantastic surround view camera, the resolution with this camera has been fantastic. They've got the processing bang on as well. Now you can also have the blind view monitoring function, which is linked to your indicators, having the camera feed put up into the instrument cluster itself. So that's a great bit of feedback that Tata has taken and executed quite nicely. Additional features include a 6-way power adjustable driver seat. There is front seat ventilation. There is a wireless phone charger, and like we saw with the Nexon, you're fine as long as you're on smooth roads. For the second things turn a little bit topsy-turvy, the placement is such that it's just going to come right loose. So you're better off probably using one of the USB Type-C 45-watt fast chargers, one up front, one at the rear. And like we saw in the Nexon, the placement of the USB ports up front along with the 12-volt socket, it's a little bit awkward. So it can be a little bit of issue the first time, but once you set your cable in there, it's pretty much going to stay there for its entire lifetime. You also have onboard an air purifier along with an AQI display. And like we saw with modern day Tata cars, there's a touch panel for the entire AC console, including the fog lamps, the HDC, the hazard light, the powered tailgate, lock and lock functions, surround view camera, the charger gun release, and even when you want to charge the car up, the release for the charger flap is also from here, although that does show up only when you switch the car off. And along with all of this, you of course have the much demanded panoramic sunroof. Time to see what the Curvv is like to drive. Well, for you guys, I've already driven it extensively before starting off this bit, and we've been going through a little bit of city roads, some bit of highway, which we're going to be revisiting in some time, but mostly we've been driving a lot through village B roads, including a lot of bad roads. But let's run down through the basics first. You have a permanent magnet synchronous motor up front, driving the front wheels. It is available in 2 states of tune. The hardware is the same. There's 150 PS
and 167.
Exactly. And the torque output with both versions is the same. Yeah. It's just corresponding to the battery pack. So the smaller battery pack, 45 kilowatt hour, gets the smaller output. and of course the 55 kilowatt hour battery pack gets the 167 PS fuel.
To compensate for the higher weight as well.
Probably to some degree, and that also affects their claimed ranges, of course. They are saying that in real world test cycles, as per Tata, what they call C1, is it?
Yeah,
C75.
C75.
Yeah, so
75% of the claim.
Basically what they're saying is with the smaller battery pack, they're expecting somewhere in the territory of 300 to 330 kilometers on a full charge. With the larger battery pack, the version that we're driving right now, 55, that's going to be in between 400 to 425 is what they're saying. And based on what we've experienced with the Nexon, our battery
it sounds about right?
Yeah, more or less.
With the long range, I think we got around 300 kilometers on a full charge, and the battery size is almost the same as the. Not almost, actually. It is larger, slightly larger.
4.5 kilowatt hours larger with the smaller battery pack.
So 300 sounds about right.
Yep, and I don't know how to go about the driving bit of this because it's an electric car. It just works. I don't know what else to tell you, because you want to drive smoothly in the city, stick to eco mode, it's fine. It'll be smooth. You can keep up with traffic easily. You can even make overtakes on eco mode. You don't even need to switch to city or sport to make that happen, although city will be a little bit nicer with overtakes for sure. Basically what happens in eco mode is the initial response is a little dull. We're in eco mode right now, but then once you give it just a little bit more throttle, it picks up and gives you that pace you need for overtakes. And of course, what's a pleasant change to see is how Tata's gotten a little bit naughty again with the sport mode that they had with the initial Nexon lot.
Yeah, initial Nexon, and with the facelift, obviously it had become a little dull. It did, boring, right? And the way it delivered power, it was fast, but it never felt
like it,
right? So in this car, sport mode feels like sport mode.
Yeah,
where it responds fast, and there's some kind of excitement that you get with this car, which is not there with the Nexon.
Yeah. So they kept it exciting when you need it, not constantly. Although that being said, it's not too difficult to get the wheels on this thing to spin. Like you give it the right dose of throttle. Like, let's just try it now, right? We are in Eco Sport. If you're a slight bit of an incline,
there you go.
See, it doesn't take much. I'm not complaining. Like, it's just on those few occasions where you decide to get a little bit naughty, and of course you do have traction control and the works too.
But honestly, even in sport mode, it doesn't feel jerky or anything.
Yeah, that's the thing, and that's also true to some degree, I would say, of what they've done with the regen modes. So there are 4 regen modes. There's 0, that's absolutely nothing. 1, 2, and 3, self-explanatory. 3 being the most extreme, and they've managed to improve just ever so slightly the calibration of the level 1 and 2 at the very least. So what would happen in the Nexon is, and still happens, is that when you're driving and you switch to a higher regen mode, if you let off the throttle, you're expecting some kind of jerky motion to happen, so you kind of account for it. But the passengers can't. So when you have a passenger with you and you're sitting at like maybe L2 or L3, it gets a little bit jerky for them. That isn't really the case over here. Although in L3, I would recommend, if you're sticking with L3, use it in absolute crawl traffic, because it still can get a little bit nauseating for your passengers if you're not careful about it. Or when you're alone too.
Yeah. But I think one thing that I really like what they've done with this car is, despite the bigger size and weight, it still drives like the Nexon, more or less.
It's as easy.
As easy. The ride is really good. So we've been driving on really narrow roads, some broken roads as well.
Plenty.
Yeah. I mean, it's not a Fortuner, right? Where you can just fly through like broken patches, but still it drives like an SUV.
It's balanced in that sense, where you're driving on smooth roads, you're not getting a suspension setup that's too tuned towards just bump absorption, and as a repercussion becoming bouncy in the process. And at the same time, while it does have a firm edge, most potholes or sharp bumps that you're going to encounter, it can handle. Like, we've come across a long range of unmarked speed breakers every now and then, and it goes to them quite peacefully. It's comfortable, it's very mature in that sense, and then that's definitely something you're going to appreciate. And I'm curious to see if they've managed to do this with the heavier Curvv, the EV. How much better can things get with the Curvv ICE?
Okay, one thing I haven't tried with this car is the ADAS. How does it work? Have you tried it?
So the suite of options that you have is super long, because it is level 2. You do have rear cross traffic alert, you have adaptive cruise control with stop and go. That is something that I have tested out. So we started off on the highway when I was following you at about 100 kilometers per hour, but then I kept ACC on, followed you into the village bureaus that were going through, and it was just on. I was completely off the pedals. It's keeping up. The only thing is, obviously at low speeds, that sometimes if you have odd roads, you might need to slow down where the car in front of you has already crossed that barrier. So maybe it'll accelerate a little bit where you don't expect it. But when you're driving in the city in regular traffic, that stop and go function works beautifully. I love how they've pulled it off. It maintains the right distance and feels very natural to get used to. Obviously, with all these ADAS systems, you need to give them time. You need to practice and get your hands a little dirty with them. But yeah, this is something that's quite nice. Lane keep assist works well. So what it'll do is when you're, let's say you're deviated too much towards one side, it'll give you a warning and it'll give you corrective steer.
That's something that I experienced, because to a certain point it helps you, then it is like you're on your own, please.
Yeah, at the end of the day, I think it's just saying, bro, I am here to assist, I'm not here to do your job for you. And besides that, you already have the radar guided blind spot monitoring. That's a nice touch. It also functions that when you're opening your door, it'll give you warnings if there's a car or something going by. AEB has also kicked in slightly, so it expected there was a local who was walking on the roadside and the car just gave me a warning, just a slight bit of a like, watch out.
Okay.
So that is also interesting, where it's so far at least felt quite India friendly, and we are talking about Udaipur's rural roads, so it is quite a helter-skelter traffic situation. So it's not gone through the full Agni Pariksha, but a light bit of a matchstick Pariksha, if you can call it that. That's definitely what it's gone through. So far I am quite happy with the ADAS setup, but of course that is something I'd like to reserve my verdict on when I get to test it more extensively in more conditions.
In Mumbai.
Oh yeah. The Tata Curvv gives you a design that is more unique and distinctive than it is polarizing. And for those of you who find this look polarizing, I'm confident that once you start seeing enough curves on the road, your opinion on that factor is going to change, because let's face it, the coupe SUV form was going to raise some controversy no matter how well they did a job. And for that matter, if you ask my own opinion, given the length limitation that they are playing with, they've done a great job, and it definitely delivers on that distinctive attention-grabbing factor that someone would want from a coupe SUV in the first place. Besides that, it gives you a tech package that leaves you wanting for absolutely nothing and gives you a powertrain that is smooth when you need it to be and can go to furious when you want it to be on the drop of a dime. But there is a gap here, and it's kind of an important one. It's the one that you want to experience when you move from one segment to the segment above it. The kind of change you want to see when you go from a Venue to a Creta, or a Brezza to a Grand Vitara, or the Sonnet to the Seltos. That is the experience of moving into a bigger car, and on that front, it doesn't feel like Tata's made quite that leap with the Curvv compared to the Nexon. Had this gap been addressed, if it gave you that sense of moving into a bigger car on the inside, it would help the Curvv go from a car that is great to recommend to being the car to recommend.